Link-2 monsters are typically the most generic monsters you can summon from the extra deck, consisting of some of the most widely available tech choices and combo enablers in the game. Today, we'll be discussing the best monsters of this wide pool, what they do, and why they're so strong. And flying in at number 10 is Knightmare Phoenix. This card is a Link-2 with 1900 attack, which has the effect to destroy a spell or trap card when it's summoned by discarding one card. Knightmare Phoenix has seen successful competitive play ever since its release in 2018, as an extra deck staple for its effect to destroy your opponent's spell and trap cards on the field. While at first glance, it might seem that requiring a discard in order to destroy a single spell or trap might make Knightmare Phoenix too costly to use compared to other spell trap removal, this isn't the case, since Knightmare Phoenix is housed in the extra deck. Unlike main deck backward removal, since you don't have to rely on being lucky and drawing into Knightmare Phoenix, discarding a card to destroy a single spell or trap is a small price to pay for the consistency inherently provided by being an extra deck monster. It also surpasses its monster destroying counterpart in Knightmare Cerberus in terms of utility, since you can't just beat over an opponent's back row. Even if you can't beat the secondary condition of its effect by co-linking Knightmare Phoenix in order to draw a card and refill your hand, a lot of decks have had cards they want to discard to the graveyard anyways, so this cost is usually negligible, and getting the draw is just the cherry on top. However, the primary reason for Knightmare Phoenix's success is its incredibly generic summoning requirements, that being any two monsters with different names. This summoning requirement is notable both for the text that is and isn't present, since, unlike most Link monsters, Knightmare Phoenix doesn't require its materials to be effect monsters, allowing it to use normal monsters and tokens to go into it. This gives it the most generic summon requirement possible for a Link-2 monster, short of just two monsters, and means that Knightmare Phoenix requires very little investment for most decks to summon. Consistent access to good effects is the primary way decks and strategies succeed competitively, so much so that many of the cards in the Forbidden Limited list are there due to being too generic for their great effects. Generic extra deck monsters typically end up on this list by enabling decks to generate ludicrous amounts of advantage, floodgate you from playing the game entirely, or enabling FTK strategies. Link monsters tend to be particularly frequent offenders in regards to enabling these types of strategies, and takes up more spots in the Forbidden Limited list than other types of extra deck monsters. The fact that Knightmare Phoenix and Cerberus haven't seen any time on the Forbidden Limited list is particularly notable, since it represents Konami drawing a proverbial line in the sand regarding the game's power creep. The existence of these two cards is a declaration that generic, on-demand back row and monster removal is acceptable in the modern metagame, both of which used to be premium effects. However, this can't be said for all the monsters on this list, since a decent amount of them, like our next spot's partner in crime, have found permanent residence on both the TCG and OCG ban lists. And shockingly, at number 9, we have Spright Sprind. This card is a 1400 attack Link-2, which requires a level, rank, or Link-2 monster as a material. It has a shared hard once per turn effect to either send a level 2 monster from your deck to the graveyard, or bounce a monster. Spright Sprind is primarily used for its effect to send any level 2 monster from your deck to the graveyard, and finds its most comfortable home in its namesake deck, Spright. But due to its generic summon requirement of 2 monsters, including any level, rank, or Link-2 monster, it can be used by any deck that can put those materials on board in order to use its foolish burial-like effect. Almost all builds of Spright will use Spright Sprind in order to send Nimble Angler from the deck to the graveyard, or in order to use its effect to special summon up to 2 level 3 or lower Nimble monsters from your deck to establish a board on their first turn. Then, after passing to their opponent, Spright can send Sprind as both an interruption by detaching material from next season monster they control to bounce a monster, and as material for any non-Link-2 play using IP Masquerena. Its utility in Spright doesn't end there though, since certain builds of Spright also have other level 2s that might want to send to the graveyard, acting as a bridge to their non-Spright engines as well. However, like many generic extra deck monsters in recent memory, these payoffs pale in comparison to the advantage Tearlaments could generate by sending a copy of either Tearlament's Merely to fusion summon, or Diviner the Herald to special summon with Sprite Elf and Foolish and a Shizu Fairy for either a Shuffle or a Miller. Even after the banning of Sprite Elf, Sprite Sprint remains one of the largest reasons that Tearlaments remain remotely playable in the TCG and OCG after the ludicrous hits to their strategies on both formats' Forbidden Limited lists. And rolling in at number 8, we have Union Carrier. This card is a Link-2 that only requires 2 monsters of the same type and attribute, and has the effect to equip a monster from your hand or graveyard to a monster you control with the same type or attribute as that card. It gives that monster 1000 attack, and if the monster was equipped from the deck, it can't be summoned this turn. The intended use of Union Carrier was for it to be used with its namesake Union monsters. These monsters are a rare and niche type of monster that, alongside Gemini and Spirit monsters, come with a unique and restrictive gimmick that consistently renders them completely unplayable. Union monsters are all about equipping monsters to other monsters in order to gain access to various effects, which sounds cool in theory, but in practice makes for an extremely fragile strategy. Because Union monsters go in the spell and trap card zone when they're equipped to a monster, it means they're susceptible to both monster and spell trap removal. In fact, it gets even worse since equipped cards are destroyed and sent to the graveyard when the monster they're equipped to is flipped face down or leaves the field in other ways. Union Carrier was intended to help alleviate this, since if you quit from the deck, you don't lose any cards from the hand if Union Carrier is destroyed. And since Union Carrier cannot be flipped face down due to being a Link monster, any monster equipped to it is protected from self-destruction from your opponent's Book of Eclipse. Unfortunately, due to the lack of a restriction of what you can equip to it, and the way it interacts with certain non-Union monsters, it earned a ban in the TCG, OCG, and Master Duel formats. The way Union Carrier was used in practice is actually quite similar to the previously mentioned Sprite Sprint. However, instead of being Foolish Burial for any level 2 monster, it instead became an extra deck version of Foolish Burial for any monster in the game, with the easiest access to being monsters of its own attribute of light. While certainly not the only place Union Carrier found success, its most prolific usage was in Drytron, an extremely powerful ritual archetype with a reputation for getting cards placed on the Forbidden Limited list. Before Union Carrier was banned, Drytron's primary boss monster was Herald of Ultimateness, a level 12 ritual monster with a non-once-per-turn Omni-Negate that requires you to discard a fairy monster for cost. Drytron would summon Union Carrier after tributing copies of Cyber Angel Ben 10 to search the deck for light fairy monsters, in order to target itself and equip another banned card, Eva. By tributing a Union Carrier equipped with Eva using Meteonis Drytron, Drytron was able to generate ludicrous amounts of advantage by banishing used Ben 10s with Eva's effect in order to search an insane number of light fairies. This turned Herald of Ultimateness into an FTK tool that can negate every single card in your opponent's opening hand by discarding fairies added by Eva, Ben 10, and Union Carrier. While Drytron is the primary reason that Union Carrier was banned, it certainly wasn't the only deck that found ways to abuse it. In the end, the ability to send any monster from your deck to the graveyard simply proved to be a bit too powerful of an effect to have on a generic Link-2. And rocketing into number 7, we have Heavymetalfoes Electrumite. Electromite is a Link-2 monster with 1800 attack that requires 2 Pendulum monsters in order to summon. On Link Summon, it allows you to add 1 Pendulum monster from your deck to your extra deck face up. You can also activate its effect to target one other face-up card you control, destroy it, and then add a face-up Pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand. Both of these effects are soft once per turns. Finally, on a hard once per turn, if a card in the Pendulum Zone leaves the field, you are required to draw 1 card. Heavymetalfoes Electrumite was released nearly a year into Master Rule 4, the rules revision that introduced Link monsters to the game, to help modernize the way Pendulums worked with the new rules. Before the introduction of Link monsters, all Pendulum decks were immensely good at swarming the field, since you could Pendulum summon as many monsters as you wanted from your hand or extra deck to any of your main monster zones. However, after Master Rule 4 restricted summoning monsters from your extra deck to your extra monster zones and the zones that Link monsters pointed to, this massive benefit that Pendulum strategies were known for disappeared overnight. The intent of Heavymetalfoes Electrumite was to give Pendulums a pair of downward pointing arrows for Pendulum summoning, in addition to giving them extra consistency to make up for a loss in swarming potential. However, Electrumite's lack of a hard once per turn on either of its best effects led many Pendulum strategies to abuse its incredible utility. Decks such as Pendulum Magicians could turbo out multiple copies of Electrumite in a single turn, netting them tons of advantage and allowing them to set up nigh unbreakable boards on their first turn. In addition to being considered the best deck for a time, Pendulum Magicians also had the ability to FTK by abusing the effect copying ability of Supreme King Dragon Starving Venom to copy the effect of Wireless Independent Nightingale, a strategy enabled by Supreme Gate 0 and Infinity alongside Electromite. The TCG and OCG ultimately took different approaches to dealing with Electromite. In the TCG, Electromite was added to the Forbidden list a few months before the introduction of the Master Rule 4 revisions. In contrast, the OCG decided to limit Electromite to 1 copy, restricting the amount of advantage you could generate with it. The banning of Electromite and the exclusion of Pendulums from the lifting of restrictions on extra deck summoning granted to Fusions, Synchros, and XEs with the introduction of the Master Rule 4 revisions left Pendulum strategies generally non-competitive in the TCG until the release of the spiritual successor to Electromite, Beyond the Pendulum. As such, Western audiences had never seen a modern format with Electromite legal until the release of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. In Master Duel, the Forbidden and Limited lists are a unique hybrid of the TCG and OCG lists, generally in an attempt to balance the game for a best-of-1 format. Master Duel took its approach in Electromite from the OCG, limited it to 1, and while Pendulums in Master Duel have access to both Electromite and Beyond the Pendulum, they're by no means the best strategy available. However, with the limiting of differently currently banned card in Blaster, Dragon Ball, Infernos, first appearing in Master Duel and then recently being mirrored in the OCG, there might be hope yet for Pendulum players of Electromite's return to the TCG. And skating into number 6 is IP Masquerena. Masquerena is a Dark Cybers monster with 800 attack that requires 2 non-link monsters in order to summon, and has the effect where, as a quick effect during your opponent's main phase, you can link summon 1 link monster using monsters you control, including IP Masquerena. This effect is a hard once per turn, and in addition to this, any link monsters that uses IP Masquerena as material cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. IP Masquerena is easily the best generic link support card ever printed. While their effects may be simple, IP's summon requirement of 2 non-link monsters is incredibly accessible. Simply by existing, IP enables any deck that can generate enough bodies on board to access quick effect interruption on your opponent's turn, by using its effect to link summon nightmares, most of which have trigger effects on summon to destroy or spin part of your opponent's board. In addition to this, the protection IP provides makes it an extremely popular option for laddering into Link boss monsters, such as Axis Code Talker or Mech Knight Crusader Avermax. A current strategy that utilizes both of these effects to its fullest is Spright, which will sometimes end on both IP Masquerena and Sprite Sprint. This allows them to immediately chain IP to Link summon as soon as their opponent takes an action during their main phase to make Avermax use an IP and Sprint as material. This gets around Sprint's restriction that prevents it from being used as a Link material the turn it's summoned, and results in an Avermax that is immune to both destruction and targeting, which can be quite a hassle to deal with. However, while IP might be one of the best extra deck options in the game, its Link rating of 2 could be considered a bit misleading. While IP technically only requires 2 materials in order to summon, its effect requires at least 3 materials total in order to use, since you need at least 1 additional material to pair with IP Masquerena. While often a downside that makes IP rather expensive to use, when combined with the monsters such as Underworld Goddess of the Closed World, this could actually be considered a feature and not a bug, by allowing you to unconditionally remove any of your opponent's high investment monsters from the field on their turn. Overall, IP is the most flexible and versatile Link monster ever printed, and immensely boosts the accessibility and utility of Link-based plays and strategies. Despite this, IP pales in comparison to the sheer power of the most broken Link-2s. Though nothing has managed to utterly break this card yet, there may be a time in the future where IP finds itself a permanent home alongside other powerful generic links on both the TCG and OCG Forbidden lists. And waltzing at number 5, we have Knightmare Goblin. Goblin is a Wind Fiend monster with 1300 attack that requires 2 monsters with different names as materials. On Link Summon and as a hard once per turn, it has the effect where you can discard 1 card in order to gain an additional normal summon to a zone Knightmare Goblin points to. And if Knightmare Goblin is co-linked when you activate this effect, you can draw 1 card. It also has an effect that gives targeting protection to co-linked monsters you control. Similarly to Heavymetalfoes Electrumite, Knightmare Goblin is another card that was released during Master Rule 4 in order to help decks that struggle with the extra deck summoning restrictions. Many decks that wanted to make Fusion, Synchro, or Xyz monsters struggled to do so, since they either had to summon to the extra monster zone or zones that Link monsters pointed to, the latter of which usually required your normal summon to set up. The ability to gain an additional normal summon was especially powerful during this time, since most combo starters back then required a normal summon to activate their effects. This was so much the case that many decks ran the Brilliant Fusion engine, which required you to play the original Guard engine in order to summon Gem Knight, Seraph Knight, using materials from your deck in order to gain an additional normal summon. However, Knightmare Goblin fulfilled the same role as the Brilliant Fusion engine much more effectively, since it only required 1 extra deck slot instead of multiple cards in the main deck and a slot in the extra deck. However, as a Link monster, Knightmare Goblin came with the inherent bonus of having Link arrows, and its Link arrows of left and right were just what many decks needed in order to perform an extra Link, otherwise known as a U-Link. Most notoriously, Spiral and Goku were able to create this extra Link using Knightmare Goblin to great effect as an extender, locking their opponent out of the extra monster zone, extra deck, and special summon it entirely by the way of Knightmare Corruptor Eebly. These decks were effectively FTKs that were insulated even further by Knightmare Goblin's targeting protection, and resulted in a swift ban of the card in both the TCG and OCG. And roaring into number 4 is Guardragon Agarpain. Agarpain is a dark dragon monster with 1500 attack that requires 2 dragon monsters as materials to summon. On a hard once per turn, you can activate its effect to special summon a dragon monster from your extra deck to an extra monster zone, or a main monster zone you control that at least 2 Link monsters are pointing to. In addition to this, you can only special summon 1 Guardragon Agarpain per turn, and it applies a continuous effect while it's on the field that locks into only being able to special summon dragon monsters. Guardragon Agarpain, alongside its brethren Link 1's Guardragon LP and Guardragon Pitsy, are all Dragon Link monsters with the effect to special summon dragon monsters from various locations to zones that 2 Link monsters are pointing to. While LP and Pitsy have the ability to special summon dragons from the deck, hand, graveyard, and banished area, and are all great effects, neither of them hold a candle to Agarpain's ability to cheat out any dragon from the extra deck. While you do have to build both your deck and board around Agarpain's inclusion, the available payoffs during its short stint of legality were insanely powerful. The main 2 monsters you would cheat out were Hot Red Dragon Arcfiend Abyss and Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, usually depending on if you were going first or second. Going first, Hot Red Dragon Arcfiend Abyss is an incredible onboard piece with 3200 attack that can, as a quick effect, target any one face-up card your opponent controls and negate its effects until the end of the turn. This means that all spell, trap, and monster effects that occur while face-up on the field, such as Lightning Storm and Evenly Matched, are fair game for this negate. On the other hand, Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon was typically ideal going second as an OTK tool, since if it attacks an opponent's level 5 or higher monster, it can gain attack equal to the current attack of the monster it's battling during damage calculation only. In addition to this, Crystal Wing can also negate the activation of a monster effect and destroy it to gain the attack of the destroyed monster, insulating it from the attack changing effects of monsters such as Honest. While Agarpain requires 2 dragon monsters to summon and applies a floodgate effect to the player who summoned it, these downsides are trivial and easy to completely ignore. making Agarpain isn't a problem since dragon monsters are already some of the best combo enablers in the game. And since the self-floodgate is a continuous effect, this means that after you've cheated out your target of choice, Agarpain can easily be linked off for a monster like Triple Burst Dragon to continue your combos completely unimpeded. It's important to note that none of the best cards that counter Agarpain and its targets, such as Nibiru the Primal Being, Darkwood No More, and Forbidden Droplet, were released until after Agarpain was banned. Even though Guardragon Agarpain used to be able to net you an easy negate to add to your end board, the introduction of the aforementioned staples, normalization of negates, and overall power creep have all dethroned it from its once hyper-dominant status as the best Link-2 monster in the game. And slithering into the number 3 spot is Predaplant Verte Anaconda. Anaconda is a dark plant monster with 500 attack that requires 2 effect monsters in order to summon, and has 2 effects with hard once per turns. Its first effect allows you to target a face-up monster in the field to change its attribute to dark for the rest of the turn. Its second effect allows you to pay 2,000 life points and send a fusion or polymerization spell from your deck to the graveyard to copy and use that spell's effect as Verte's effect. However, the second effect comes as a restriction that you cannot spell summon monsters for the rest of the turn after resolving this effect. Of Verte's 2 effects, the only one most decks care about is the effect to act as nearly any fusion-related spell in the game. While locking you out of special summoning for the rest of the turn is quite the heavy restriction, its generic summoning requirements combined with the high-powered effects Verte can make use of completely eclipse this downside. Some of Verte's best targets such as Fusion Destiny, Red Eyes Fusion, and Branded Fusion all come with massive restrictions with the intention of preventing easy access to monsters you can summon with them. However, one of the best parts about Verte is it copies the effect of a fusion or polymerization spell, circumventing the heavy restrictions that would typically come with activating these powerful spells. This is because the effect being activated is technically Verte's and not the sent spells. Therefore, the only restriction really applied to the player is Verte's lock from special summoning for the rest of the turn. However, this restriction is quite pitiful as well, since any deck that uses Verte will just make sure it's the last thing they do on their turn, either as the capstone to an already competent end board, or more notoriously, as a backup plan in case their main combo is interrupted by using whatever bodies they can throw on board. Similarly to some of the other cards on this list, Verte's generic summoning materials means that nearly any deck in the game can run it. The sheer accessibility of Verte and its ability to drop incredibly powerful boss monsters, such as Destiny Hero Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer and Red Eyes Dark Dragoon for the low cost of running a few Garnets in your deck led to both the TCG and OCG to banning Predaplant Verte Anaconda, with the OCG even taking it a step further and banning Red Eyes Dark Dragoon for good measure. This leaves Master Duel as the only current format in which Verte is legal, where it typically sees widespread play in a large variety of decks alongside Fusion Destiny and DPE. However, Verte has not seen as much play in Master Duel as of late due to the level 2 restriction that is imposed upon Runic Sprite, one of the strongest decks of the last format, as well as the recent addition of Ishizu Shufflers and Tearlaments, which both completely counter and even can gain advantage off an opponent's DPE. While Verte may not be in the best position right now due to the current Tier 0 format Master Duel faces, it's likely to come back in the future once Tearlaments have been nerfed, or if Dragoon is made legal for play in Master Duel. And fittingly, at number 2, we have Sprite Elf. Sprite Elf is a Fire Thunder monster with 1400 attack and requires 2 monsters as material to summon, including a level, rank, or Link-2 monster. It cannot be used as a Link material the turn it's Link summoned, and your opponent cannot target monsters it points to with card effects. As a hard once per turn, during the main phase, you can target 1 level 2 monster in your graveyard and special summon it, or if your opponent controls a monster, you can target a rank or Link-2 monster instead. At first glance, Sprite Elf may seem to be an obviously strong card, but not a completely broken one. Unlike many of the cards of this list, besides being generic, Sprite Elf doesn't exhibit any of the telltale signs of a broken card. It can't be used as a Link material the turn it's Link summoned, which prevents you from Link climbing with it, and its effect to special summon a level, Link, or rank 2 is a hard once per turn, which seems like it should be enough to keep it in check. The targeting protection it grants the monsters it points to definitely feels a bit extra, but doesn't seem like something that would be that much of a problem with the abundance of non-targeted monster removal that exists. However, alongside the number 1 spot on this list, Sprite Elf is a textbook case of what happens when you make a strong Link monster too generic. In both the OCG and TCG, Sprite Elf found a comfortable home as a staple in the strongest decks in both formats, Sprite and Tearlaments respectively. In its namesake Sprite, Elf is an incredible extender that enables you to repeatedly search your deck with Sprite Blue and Sprite Jet to push for game alongside Gigantic Sprite, and act as an interruption tool that lets you summon out the incredibly strong Totally Awesome to use twice on your opponent's turn. In Tearlaments, Sprite Elf was primarily used to start large sequences of mill chains by summoning either Tearlaments merely or Diviner the Herald to send an Ishizu fairy to the grave. The targeting protection it provides to monsters it points to also proved to be invaluable to Ishizu tier mirror matches, allowing you to protect your monsters from both your opponent's Predaplant Dragostapelia and a Tearlaments Kaleidoheart. In both strategies, Sprite Elf was often paired alongside IB Masquerena in order to Link summon a Mech Knight Crusade Avermax on your opponent's turn, just like the previously mentioned Sprite Sprint, in order to get around the restriction that prevents it from being used as link materials to turn its link summon. In the end, both formats made the decision that Sprite Elf was too strong of a card to keep around, and ended up receiving the ban hammer alongside many other recently released cards. However, as the last few months in Master Duel have shown, the power of Sprite Elf had been incredibly overshadowed by the impact of tier limits prior to its banning. Unlike the TCG and OCG, Master Duel had an entire format to play with Sprite Elf before the introduction of tier limits, and the resulting meta led to the unlikely combination of Runic and Sprite becoming the most dominant deck. This was in no short order due to the strength of Sprite's main deck negates, which were heavily bolstered by the deck's access to both Sprite Elf and Hugin the Runic Wings for free level 2 bodies via Runic's quick play spell cards. However, while Sprite Elf is an incredibly strong card that warps the metagame around itself, the last card on this list single-handedly broke such a wide pool of monsters to the point where its legality was the sole deciding factor of nearly 10 different cards' inclusion on the Forbidden Limited list. And left to rust alongside its Forbidden cohorts at number 1 is Crystron Halqifibrax. Halqifibrax is a water machine monster with 1500 attack that requires 2 monsters, including a tuner, as its materials in order to summon, and has the effect on Link Summon to special summon a level 3 or lower tuner monster from your hand or deck in defense position, but it cannot activate its effects this turn. Halqifibrax also has a second effect where, during your opponent's main or battle phase, you can cheat out any tuner synchro monster from your extra deck by banishing Halqifibrax from your field, with the summon being treated as a proper synchro summon. Both of Halqifibrax's effects are hard once per turn. Similarly to Heavymetalfoes Electrumite, everything about Crystron Halqifibrax was designed around the highly restrictive rules regarding extra deck summoning during Master Rule 4 as a way to bolster the viability of synchro monsters. While Halq was successful in achieving this goal in the OCG as soon as its release in 2017, it arrived in the TCG only a month before the introduction of the Master Rule 4 revisions. Because of this, it was far too late for it to have any lasting impact on the TCG during Master Rule 4. Despite this, the impact Crystron Halqifibrax has on any format which includes it is immeasurable. Halq's incredibly generic summoning conditions of 2 monsters, including a tuner, single-handedly resulted in the mass banning of any monster that even resembled a 1-card Halq. This was primarily done not to raid in synchro strategies, but hyper-efficient link climbing strategies. To supplement this, all of the best tuners for link climbing that were valid targets for Halqifibrax's effect to summon from the deck were also mass banned. To make this point crystal clear, during the time Halqifibrax is legal, over 10 different tuners had to be added to the Forbidden list exclusively due to the interactions with Crystron Halqifibrax. This led many players to the conclusion that maybe the problem wasn't these tuners, but with Halqifibrax itself. A conclusion Konami slowly came around to after nearly 2 years of the card being legal in the TCG, and after 7 years of it existing in the OCG. To give an example of the ridiculous shenanigans Crystron Halqifibrax enables, the first Engines Explained video that we posted to this channel was all about how you could use Halq alongside Celine, Queen of Master Magicians, and Effect Veiler into a 5300 attack access code talker fully loaded with 2 pops, all off of a single Halqifibrax summon. While the Celine engine was an incredible utility that gave nearly any deck the ability to OTK, this was still nothing compared to the ridiculous combos Halq enabled alongside its partner in crime, Mecha Phantom Beast Auroradon. But Halq's utility doesn't end there. In addition to the combos enabled by Halqifibrax's ability to special summon a tuner from the deck, if your combo is interrupted by your opponent's hand traps such as Ash Blossom and Joy Spring or Invaded Impermanence, ending with Halq on the field is barely a downside. This is because it also has the effect to cheat out a tuner synchro monster from your extra deck as if it were properly synchro summoned as a quick effect during your opponent's turn. This was frequently used to either destroy an opponent's spell trap with TG Wonder Magician or draw a card using Formula Synchron, both of which also have the ability to synchro summon on your opponent's turn, giving you access to even more ways to play on your opponent's turn. The amount of free advantage Crystron Halqifibrax can generate is really limited only by yours and your opponent's patience. With Halq, the sky's the limit, making it easily the best Link-2 monster of all time. Alright, and that's the list. If there are any other powerful Link-2 monsters we may have missed, or if you have any ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.